was similar to the one that he carried when he was in the Navy, a 1911 Colt 45 automatic. And fairly recently, he gave both of those guns to Griff. So as Griff got older, matured, became a young man, he would have tangible evidence about his grandfather and his his great-great-grandfather, and could think a little bit about how they lived, what they did, what those meant to them, and what part of their life it played. I just thought it was wonderful that he passed that along, and was so proud of his heritage and wanted Griff to have that heritage. Just thought that was a wonderful gesture. I have a term that I reserve for very few people. If I say somebody's a good guy, I've known him a long time, and I think a lot of them. Bruce was a good guy. I liked him a lot. We'll miss him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here, and thank you, Blue, for asking me to speak. I wish I'd gone first now. See if I can control myself, and I'm definitely rethinking that video option right about now. So, for those of you who don't know my work relationship with Bruce, he was the boss of my boss when I first came on in 1998. I didn't have a ton of interaction with him then, but a little while later I took over as IT manager, and then Bruce was my direct boss. Here are a few memories that really stick out with me. Oh, and for those who don't know me that well, I tend to use comedy as a deflection technique, so get ready for a few, I guess. It's okay, Bruce used to laugh too, because he used to laugh a lot at my fantasy football picks. Pretty much anybody's fantasy football picks. He had a knack for thinking that he was a fantasy genius, and he was pretty good. But we used to do trades just to get him riled up. We'd make a trade, somebody in the team, and he'd be the first one to fire off an email or actually walk down, to the locker room. And some of those email threads or verbal debates were pretty hilarious, and those are definitely going to stick with us. He also called Clint, Scott, and myself the commies because we ran this particular fantasy football group, and just like Bruce, if it wasn't ran in a way that he agreed with, well, then he didn't like it. Which, put him in a tough situation for a stubborn control freak. You guys have seen the picture? I guess you guys are wondering a little more about it. Bruce obviously loved his 49ers. I was not too happy about living in Texas with the Dallas Cowboys. So one day Clint, Paul, and I got the idea that we were going to decorate his new car at the time with some Dallas Cowboy paraphernalia. We tried to find something subtle enough that hopefully he'd walk by it and he'd drive off with it for a while, and everybody else would be laughing. But he caught it pretty quick, and he didn't think it was that funny either. Bruce called me Kenny from day one. I have no idea why. The nickname at that time probably hadn't been used for a decade, at least. For Bruce, it was more of a term of endearment. It was special. Of course, now Clint, uses that name. Thank you, Clint. I've had a lot of meetings with Bruce over the years. Usually, the one-on-one meetings would go something like this. He'd come by my office, or I'd be in the hallway. And then he'd just say, "Come on." Most of our meetings were downstairs in the smoking area. And then I'd have to go home, and it'd smell like I was at the bar all day. I actually had him confess to Jackie once that, no, I really was working. I promise. Bruce has been a great influence on me in many areas. Most of you don't know this, but back in 1999, I almost quit. Frustration with my current boss, not Bruce. Personal issues and, just other stuff gave me a issue where I was going to leave the company. Of course, Bruce let me simmer, for a few days, but he eventually talked me out of it, and I've been pissed off ever since. Because I could have Cisco stock options by now, so. But seriously, it was the best decision. And it was a great place to work, and still is, to learn a lot from Bruce and many others. Bruce understood the importance of education, so he was instrumental in my getting back to school, finishing my associate's degree, and later my bachelor's. He was always poking and prodding about it, so for that I'm grateful. I think all of us loved seeing Bruce when just the way he changed when Griff was born. He did change. It was like a wave of happiness, came over him. Just if he was talking about a trip or the trains, pretty much anything, Griff. I don't know Griff, but I know they'll always have a special connection. Lastly, I'd like to talk about my most recent memories. The stubborn, focused guy who usually did things his way, or at least on his terms. He worked tirelessly on many projects, the most recent one being the certification project. He completed that just a few weeks ago, and he was proud. We were all proud of him and the team. It was just another prime example of Bruce. It was a prime example of Bruce's will, his determination to get things done. All wonderful traits of a wonderful man that we're all going to miss. We're all going to miss greatly. Thank you. Jeff.
For those who don't know me, I'm Joe Rugraff, and I was thinking the last couple of weeks, how did I first meet Bruce and how did we ever become friends? The first time I met Bruce was in 1996. Tucker Rocky had just bought the Denver location, and Bruce and Tom Oliphant and I went to Colorado Springs to do some due diligence there and check the warehouse out. And I learned a couple of things about Bruce on that trip that kind of tell a little bit about his character. First of all, he really loved American Airlines. And as I got to know Bruce over the years, I realized that he purposely was annoying to American Airlines just because that's how he had fun. And the other thing that I learned about Bruce was he kind of had a sick sense of humor. On that trip, Tom got food poisoning and was not feeling well. And he was supposed to be out in the warehouse checking out the inventory. And I felt sorry for him since he wasn't feeling well. So I said, well, I'll go out there. Just tell me what you want me to look for you, and I'll go out there and I'll check it out for you. Well, it was about 20 below zero. And the warehouse had a concrete floor, and I think the owner was trying to save money before he sold, and he didn't turn the heat on. And so it was pretty cold in there, and you could just feel the cold coming up from the concrete, and my feet were numb after being out there for about 5 minutes. And Bruce said, well, there's a dog out there. It's a real friendly dog, so just when you see him, give him a pat on the head. So I'm out there counting this inventory for Tom, and I think really the two of them set me up, but I'm not positive. So I go down this aisle, and there's this dog who starts growling at me and chased me down the aisle to another aisle. And Bruce just thought that was funny as hell. And so that was my first experience with Bruce. And shortly after that, I came down to Dallas to work at Tucker Rocky, and he didn't, you know, I think we became friends because we didn't have any friends. You know, he doesn't really care for salespeople as a general rule. So, you know, that counted out the salespeople. He'd pissed off all the purchasing people by the time I was there. So that kind of, you know, counted out the purchasing department. And so who was left but an accountant? There was no IT department at the time except for Jim Palmer, and he was out in California and didn't want to talk to anybody anyway. So there was me, and I didn't really have any friends because I came from LDI, and everybody was afraid the minute they said something to me, I'd pick up the phone and call Andre Lacey and tell him what they told me. So that was kind of how we got to be friends. You know, over the years we would travel, and that's why I brought up the American Airlines thing, because, you know, some of my fondest memories are these trips and the things he did to American while we were traveling, and that was kind of fun. The things that, but I was also thinking about, you know, why were we friends? And I think the thing of it is, and a lot of you have said this, you know, Bruce was a loyal guy. You became his friend, and he would back you up. He would take care of you. You know, he was always there for you, and that's one of the things that I remembered about Bruce. A few years ago, I had to have a surgery, a pretty serious major surgery, and I woke up one night, and there's Bruce in my hospital room, one of the few people that had come to visit me at the time. And there, you know, there was Bruce. That was a scary sight. The other thing about Bruce that a lot of you have mentioned, and it struck me too as I was thinking about him, was his fondness for kids. You know, he adopted, after we became friends, then Blue became friends with my wife, and he became friends with our kids. And you know, he really adopted our kids. And Bruce just, you know, as many of you have indicated, just has a soft spot for kids. And I was thinking about, you know, why is that? And I think it's because Bruce himself was a young guy. Physically, maybe he was getting older, but mentally, he was a young guy. He was always trying to learn. He was always keeping up with what was new. He always wanted to know what was going on with other people. And I think that's why he had an affinity for kids, because he liked watching them grow and develop. And just like his subordinates, the guys that he mentored over the years, he liked watching them develop and grow, and that you know, that was all part of Bruce's thing. And I think that's why, you know, when Griff came into the world, it was like, now not only is it somebody that he can mentor and teach how to be an ops guy, but he also you know, was another kid. And that was the other thing that struck me about Bruce and our friendship, because I'd only worked at TR for 4 years and I left, and we continued to be friends even after that, which doesn't usually happen with people that you meet at work. And I guess the last thing I'd just like to bring up that struck me as we were talking, I saw Bruce not too long before he died, and as usual we were talking about new technology, and he'd been hooked on some new reality TV show about taking old cars apart and rebuilding them and selling them for ridiculous amounts of money, and you know, he was just enthralled with this car show he'd been watching. And one of the last things that we were talking about was he said, you know, a really successful ops guy always has a good story to tell management. And you know what? Bruce had a good story.
Okay, now I'm up as myself, not Jason anymore. The best part about listening to all this is that, the funniest part is that my dad always claimed to be a non-social person. And Blue and I, one of the last days that he was really alive and really with it, I had flown in, and Clint and Richie? No, Richie was there that day. Clint and Richie were there, and And Blue and I went inside, and we were just cracking up about how my dad always said he was non-social. And so to listen to all these stories is so funny, because clearly he was not non-social. So no more work talk. This is the end of the talking, and you guys can get up. Thank you, everybody who spoke. It was great to listen to what you thought about my dad. This one might be a little hard to get through, so. And I just want to say, I didn't write it in here because I couldn't figure out how to put everything in, but it reminded me, when you all knew how much he loved kids too, that he loved, before Griff, he loved E. He talked about him all the time. He loved Logan and Sydney, who just walked in the door, which were his neighbors, and 2 other little boys, Teddy and Owen, that were next door neighbors too. And he loved watching them grow up. And I think that over the past 6 months, as Griff came to visit more often, and Griff loves Logan and Sydney and Teddy and Owen, that it just was like a full circle for my dad. So I'm glad you guys walked in then. So how in the world are you supposed to sum up a person's life and your feelings towards them in 5 minutes? Blue only gave me 5 minutes. Just kidding. No. If the clock was running out, what would you want said about your own life? I could tell you about what my dad loved in this world. Blue, me, Griff, Jason, his sisters, music, knowledge, flowers, the smell of jasmine, the 49ers, California, a good foggy day, most all sports, Mexican food, and a great glass of red wine. I could tell you countless stories that would make you laugh, but most of them you really had to be there for to get it. My dad and I were inseparable when I was a child. I was Daddy's girl through and through. We were a pair. As I grew into a teenager, I'm not sure he really knew what to do with me most of the time. He had a rule for me, which was, don't tell me what I don't want to know. Seriously, that was his rule. This was pretty cool for a teenage girl, although it did get me into a lot of trouble. I realize now that a lot of that trouble really just made me who I am today. I can say, though, that that probably will not be my rule for Griff, but I will try to bring some of my dad's laid-back attitude to Griff when he becomes a teenager. My house was where most of my friends wanted to be, because my dad was so easygoing and could talk to us on our level. He spent hours and hours letting me drive around when I had my learner's permit, and we would listen to the Steve Miller Band. Pretty sure now it was just his way to spend time with me and also to get out of the house. We also had a huge love of watching the 49ers together. Bill Walsh was his favorite, and Joe Montana and Steve Young were mine. At my wedding, we danced to This Is It by Kenny Loggins, because Bill Walsh played that for his 49ers team the first time they ever went and won the Super Bowl. If you've never listened to the words of that song, please do. He loved cars and driving fast his whole life, right up until the end, which we did not like. He started to develop a car collection for Griff beyond what the train collection is from his first birthday. And we do need an addition to our house because my entire garage is filled with motorized cars for one child. But Griff, like Gramps, has a lot of friends, so it's come in handy. He wanted to make sure that Griff knew how to drive very early on, just like he did with me. In fact, he bought me a moped when I was 14 and a half years old, which is illegal, in case you didn't realize that, and let me drive it around until I got 8 tickets, and finally he said, you know what, I think we better put this thing away until you're 16. So in typical 4-year-old fashion, Griff told me 2 nights ago, as we were going to bed, that he wanted a fire truck to drive for Christmas. And he asked me if Gramps would send him one. And I said, no, buddy, Gramps can't send you a fire truck because he lives in the sky now, remember? He said, oh, yeah, Okay, well then Blue can send me one, right? That kid can always make me smile. Living in different states was challenging for my dad and I. We didn't really know how to have a relationship that consisted of talking on the phone, and we didn't visit as much as we should have. I told my dad a few months ago that that time back then was what most people go through when their kids are teenagers. We just happened to escape it back then. We figured out how to come back together, mostly through the help of my husband, and our new adult relationship began to flourish. Having Griff was a huge bonding experience for us. I always wanted to tell my dad first what crazy things that kid did, or send him a picture when he did something I knew my dad would get a kick out of. Griff and my dad had such an extraordinary bond, and he understands what has happened more than you can imagine. We've been talking to him about how Gramps is all around us and will always live in our hearts. So the other night, again when we were going to bed, my husband motioned to Griff the I love you sign. He said, "I love you." Griff's quiet for a second, and then he looks at Jason and he says, "Does Gramps live in your belly too, Daddy?" He had the heart and the belly a little confused. We went through where each of our hearts were, and so gotta love that kid. When my dad was diagnosed with the cancer, I quickly came to see him, and as we did many times, he asked me if there was anything I wanted to say to him or to know. And like a little girl, I said, "I think that you love Griff more than you love me." And he simply said, looked right at me, and he said, "He is you." Those 3 words were some of the most important words he ever said to me. From that moment on, I saw myself through his eyes, and it was an incredible view, a beautiful gift. There is no time like the present to tell someone how you feel. It's unfortunate that he could not hear all of this in this way, and I wish we did this more. And I can truly say that there was not a thing left unsaid between my dad and I when he transitioned on. In the end, my dad and I talked so much about what life meant, what I believed happened when someone dies, and most important, did his life really matter? I ask you to make his life matter when you leave today. My dad was not ready to go at all. He wanted to do so much more and to be the grandfather to Griff that he grew up with. He wanted to grow old with Blue, or at least see Blue get old. In the last 6 months of his life, he really opened his heart and started to just be instead of do. He found more pleasure in the simple things as his body forced him to slow down. One of the most precious gifts I'll take away from this experience with my dad is the act of deep listening, which I find interesting that so many people brought up. My dad had what I considered to be a most annoying habit when talking to him on the phone. He used a phone like a walkie-talkie. So basically, when he was on whether the landline or the cell phone, this is how he would talk to you. So guess what? When you're talking, nobody's listening. And he would just keep talking and talking and talking. And it took me a long time to figure out that's what he was doing when I was talking to him. So I ended up really letting that go when he was sick and just gave in to just listening to him instead of trying to be heard. I never knew what a gift that would be. In this process of deep listening, I got to go past my dad's personality and really connect with him on a soul level. In the end, we all just want to know that we matter, to know we are heard, and to feel that someone understands us and loves us for all our humanness, our faults and all. This practice of deep listening is the ultimate gift that we can give each other. The second thing I learned is to never say, when I get through this, I'm going to do that. My dad said that a lot at the end and kept waiting till the chemo was over or a treatment was over to do a few things that he really wanted to do. And he ran out of time to do them. Life is designed so that we are always going through something. The challenge is to flow with it, accept it, be grateful for the gifts we have, and to know that each breath we breathe is a gift. I told him on one of the last weekends that I visited with Griff and Jason that through his death, I have been able to live more than I ever have in my life. And I know that's hard to understand, but when everything else falls away, that's all we really have is that love. So I hope that you will make his life and death matter, and that you will begin to live your life more fully with an attitude of gratefulness and to listen deeply to those you love. If I leave this life knowing that my child loves me half as much as I love my dad, and if I can leave Griff really knowing how much he is loved, then I know my life will have mattered and that my dad's legacy of love for me will live on in Griff. Thank you.
That was amazing series of words by everybody. I want to thank all of you who shared the thoughts and all of the memories that Bruce gave us. He clearly was a very special person. He touched a lot of us. He meant a lot to all of us. So I want to thank all of you for sharing these thoughts,